Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Phil and I hanging out this week and talking about, can we retire at 55? That's the topic of conversation. Phil, I'm 51 this year, so I like this idea.
I just turned 55, so I'm not retiring now.
Okay. All right. But could we?
Possible.
Possible.
There's nothing that's not, impossible. So I would say, yeah, it's definitely possible if you planned right.
Yeah. Yeah. We were talking about, you and I were talking about classic cars a week or so ago, just kind of chit chatting. And I was talking about my muscle car that I had picked up, and I was wanting to do some things to it. And I was talking with a builder, a guy who specializes in restoring this particular car. Okay. And I said, well, could we do this or that? And he goes, look, there's nothing you can't do. If
it's a blank slate. Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
If you got the money.
It all comes down to the money.
And that would be retirement as well. So there's nothing
absolutely.
to say you can't retire early, but do you have the money? So that's what we're going to talk about this go around. We've got Yahoo. There we go.
There we go.
Yahoo's pretty good.
Yahoo Finance.
I like Yahoo. I like Yahoo's. They're pretty good too. We're going to do this Yahoo Finance article. We're going to pull some information from there and talk about basically, can we retire at 55? Is it feasible? We'll break down some of the issues facing folks and what, might be in the way if this is truly on your mindset. And a lot of people, it probably is, Phil, because we're so frustrated with the world. We're so tired of all the pandemic, this, that, and the other, and rules and things that has just been happening the last couple of years. Everybody is all over the place with their feelings and their mindsets. So it's on a lot of people's minds actually retiring early. So
absolutely. There's a lot of people that did during the pandemic. And,
yeah, that's true.
And they kind of got a taste of working at home or, not having that office environment and finally said, hey, I kind of like this. I don't want to go back as they started opening offices up and, bringing them back in. So, yeah.
And we've also got a couple of email questions we're going to throw in this as well, Phil, from the Peanut Gallery. So we're going to dive
right in. Peanut Gallery. There we go.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. That's one of those old sayings that my dad used to say it all the time, but I decided to look it up real fast and see. And so just in case you were wondering, the Peanut Gallery originated in the old vaudeville theaters back in the 1900s, and people would throw peanuts.
Okay.
That's how they would heckle. Not only would they heckle, but they would
it's dangerous. Yeah. It's not dangerous. I mean, it's just a peanut, but still.
Well, you think about more like
depending on how far away they were. I mean, it could hurt.
Yeah. Well, you think about like for folks who maybe need a reference, the Blues Brothers when they were playing different bars, and they played an old country western bar, and they were behind a chicken wire cage, and people were throwing beer, beer bottles. Same idea, right? So apparently, throwing projectiles at performers is a long-standing history. But anyway, so we got a couple of emails as well, or some statements from some people that kind of relate to this 55 retiring early that we'll throw in there as well.
Sure.
So first off, how many of your clients, Phil, how many people have you seen or that reach out to you to say, hey, I do want to retire, maybe not 55, but just early?
55 is really early. I have several clients that would retire, late 50s, early 60s for sure.
Okay.
A lot of times clients, for whatever reason, have in their mindset, it's Social Security. Oh, I hit Social Security filing age 62, I can retire.
Right.
But they're two totally unrelated decisions, really. Or I shouldn't say unrelated, but separate decisions, put it that way.
Well, you say 62, you say, well, that's still early. It's
called
definitely
early then. Correct.
Yep. Yeah. So, technically 62, but so 55 is definitely really early. Immediate challenges that hit you as a professional doing this for many years at 55?
In today's environment, probably the biggest challenge, and even to the individual retiring at 62, is going to be healthcare. Because you're not eligible for Medicare to 65. There is no early on Medicare. So 10 years of paying your own medical. Yeah. And if you're coming, especially from a kind of a corporate environment where maybe you've had corporate provided healthcare, you're contributing to it, but you've never really experienced the true cost of healthcare, so to speak, out of your own pocket. You have to run those numbers first and make sure it's feasible. It's one of those things that once you start looking at them, you might be thinking, well, this is crazy. Why would I pay $1,500, $1,800 a month for healthcare? And that's not a joke. That's reality. And that's not great coverage either.
Right.
why would I do that? I'll just go without, that
Yeah.
is not a recommendation by any means. Do not go without healthcare, because one bad accident or, health condition that comes up,
Yep.
I mean, that can destroy retirement.
Well, so let's look at a couple of things here, Phil. So retiring at 55, let's go 65 for a second. So some of the information here, and we go with an average age. It's not an average, but it's getting close, 90. Okay,
right.
So what is it? It's like what, 86, I think, for females.
Something like that. And usually in planning, we use 85 for men and 90 for females. But
okay, so let's go with 90.
All
so
right.
65 to 90, you're talking 25 years of money that you.
Oh yeah, it's a long time.
So absolutely. 55. Now you're talking 35.
Yep.
35 years.
Yeah. And I mean, 65 to 90, those 25 years, you have Social Security in there somewhere, and I mean, if you're delaying it till 70, trying to get the maximum, maybe those first 5 years, you're spending all of your money before you hit Social Security, but now at least it's a big number or bigger, and it could make up 40, 50, 60% of your income, kind of depending on what your income need is.
Yeah.
But if you take that number down to 55, now if you're waiting till 70, I mean, that's a long time. You got 15 years of spending your money alone.
I mean, think about this for a second, folks. So if you retire at 55 and you go to age 90, let's just say you live that long, it's 35 years in retirement. Yes, at some point you'll turn on the Social Security, but 35 years, think about that number for a second. Let's say you started your career, like a meaningful career, at 20. Well, that's 35 years to 55. So you could literally, but who has probably their full meaningful career at 20? Not many of us, right?
So I mean, maybe if you're going to college, it'd be 22.
Yeah,
maybe
so
23,
maybe 25,
something like that.
You know? So you actually would be retired longer in many cases than you actually worked.
Right.
Could be anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I have had a few clients that have retired earlier like this, but usually it's very unique cases. Number one, they've gotten into a career with a pension. So that's a whole nother game. I mean, if you have a career that had a pension, military is very common, so maybe you went into the military early, you got your 30 years in, now you're now you're possibly,
my buddy did that. He retired at 45 based on the fact that but just retired military pension and disability from the military.
Okay.
For getting blown up basically, but still,
right.
But he did his 20 plus years. But those are unique situations.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not, for the average individual, unless you have a significant amount of savings, inherited a bunch of money, or you have a pension, it's going to be difficult. You've got to run the math out to see, and it really comes down to what your version of retirement is. I mean, if you've got a pretty simplistic lifestyle and you don't need a lot of income, you can do it. Don't underestimate it and say, I looked at my utilities and my mortgage is paid off and I'm spending $1,500 a month. I'm like, okay,
I can spend $1,500 forever. Yeah.
That's $18,000 a year. That's what you need. I mean, if that's your case, and you can do it,
you can do it.
You're not going to be doing a whole lot of activities guaranteed,
right.
So what does retirement look like? I mean, and that's the other thing to consider too, 65 versus, or 55 versus like a 65.
Yeah.
I mean, at 55, you're probably more active, able to do more things. That comes into play. That type of retirement is much more expensive.
When you said that, the viewers might have, if you're watching this, might have saw my eyes. I went, hey, I could do that. I don't go anywhere. Like, I'm always here at the house.
So if Mark's not here next week, we know what happened.
Yeah, I was like, I could do that. All right, so here's some numbers to try. So you're talking about running the math. So let's run this a little bit. We'll try to pinpoint this down a little bit if we can. So it's got this example set up here. It says if it's possible to retire at 55 on $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million. So they want to go with this basic rule of thumb that you can kind of come up with. So a commonly accepted piece of retirement planning suggests that having 7 times your annual income, Phil, can get you where you need to be. So at 55, if you make $100,000 a year, you need 700,000 saved by your 55th birthday, and you could do it. As a professional, what do you think about that?
I would say I don't know if that's feasible. I mean, a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, like I was saying, you've got to be realistic with your expectations. Now, I mean, if you're making $100,000 a year,
Okay.
And you run the numbers on it and look at your budget truly, and say, okay, well, yeah, I made 100, but after taxes, my net is 80, or whatever it is. And out of that, I'm saving half of it. You're putting 40 away a year.
Yeah.
So what it really comes down to, if I'm spending 40 grand a year net, so if I have 100,000 or 700,000, again, using rules of thumb, I mean, it used to be a 4%. Now it's closer to 3, so 3% of 700, that's only 21,000 a year.
And you're living off of 40.
And if you're living off of 40, making 100, that's assuming you're saving half of what you're netting.
And you can't supplement that with Social Security yet because you're not old enough.
Right. Now, granted, I guess you could spend more than maybe that 3% up front if you were going to, get Social Security at some point. So that's why I say you really have to run the math out on that to see. But there's a lot of risk in that. It's one of those things you really have to look at it. The longer that you're pulling from your investment accounts, you've got to really have a plan in place to manage risk. So you're going into a market like we're seeing now, a lot of volatility. If you're counting on that asset to generate the income you need in retirement, I mean, bonds are down. They're not generating the income right now. In fact, values are down pretty significantly. The market itself is down. So I mean, if that's where you're relying on pulling from because you don't have any other sources of income, that can be very detrimental in those early stages of retirement. So
at the time we're taping this, Phil, yesterday the Dow took a slapping. Or the market took a slap yesterday. As time we're taping this, it's up a little bit to start today. But CNN has this report out saying that the S&P is having its worst start to a year since 1939. So again, trying to retire at 55 in this environment can certainly be challenging and a bit daunting.
Right.
And you mentioned.
Not even mentioning inflation. I mean, that's
not even mentioning inflation. But you mentioned healthcare, so I want to bring up the fact that they brought this up as well, and it said the caveat, the outlier that could really mess people up is healthcare for early retirement. So the options they're talking, you got this 10-year gap, COBRA coverage, purchasing coverage through the marketplace, enrolling in a spouse's plan. Now, let's think about this one for a second. Let's go. You got.
Wait a minute. I think that's kind of cheating, isn't it?
Right. You got what I was going.
I'm going
to
retire at 55.
I want to retire at 55, but you keep working. Yeah. How's that going to go? Right.
If you can convince your spouse of that, give me a call because I'd like to know how that worked.
That's a whole nother ball of wax right there. You might get retired at 55. And that's the funny thing about this is my wife's going to watch this, start giving me the evil eye.
Don't get any ideas.
She already does it because I'm 5 years older than her anyway. Right. So she's already like, but healthcare sharing or just going without. And so it really, kind of makes it's a dangerous animal to get into. So with that said, let me jump to an email question to tie this up a little bit here. So we got an email from a lady named Penny, and she said, I'm retiring at 56. This made possible mainly through the fact that I have a government job, which provides a pension. Now, we didn't talk about that yet, Phil. So, and guaranteed health insurance. I also have a 457 plan that I can access, as well as other passive income coming in, and the spouse who does plan to work for 3 more years. So, pension.
So, in her scenario, there's a lot more potential just because of the pension, number one. And the guaranteed health care she mentioned, and a lot of times that's the case. I mean, if you've worked for the government somewhere, whether it's military, postal, anything like that, where you have some kind of a pension, usually there's healthcare coverage attached to that in retirement. Now it's a whole nother ballgame because you have some guaranteed income coming in. You don't have to wait for Social Security. In fact, you might not even have Social Security as a benefit if your income has primarily been from non-covered work like that. And now you've got healthcare, so the totally different game. So
but these definitely like my buddy as well. These are one-off. These are definitely
this isn't the average individual that is just.
I can hear the American taxpayers right now saying, "You're welcome."
Exactly.
For those who don't know, Phil, what's a 457 plan?
It's another type of a retirement plan for nonprofits or governmental entities.
Okay.
So you get into the whole retirement savings plan world, and I mean, there's hundreds of names for them: RSPs, SSIPs, 401ks,
Yeah.
403bs, for all these different, IRS codes is what it comes down to. But
okay, let me get your reaction to this next one. Chloe, she writes in, and she had said a couple of weeks ago we had put some stuff out, and she said, "I'm 51 and contemplating retirement soon. Saved up enough, about $1 million, but rising inflation and declining stock markets have me wondering if I can pull the trigger at 55. So she's still got 4 years to go, Phil, to hit retirement. She's got about $1 million, but she's worried about inflation. So at least she's thinking.
Yeah. So she has to have a plan in place. Is it possible? Sure. I mean, you have to have run the numbers to understand that income need, and then make sure the assets are positioned in such a way that the market isn't going to affect that, because you don't want to plan on retiring today if you don't have hedges set up to where money I'm going to be spending in the next at least 5 years, maybe 10 years, you're hedging against downside market volatility.
Right.
Because if you're spending from an account as it's losing value, that's it's going to add up to a bad scenario. You're compounding the effect of that loss as you're pulling more and more shares out worth less money to get that dollar you needed. So you just don't want to do that. You want to make sure you've got some kind of a strategy set up to hedge against that long-term inflation, making sure you're keeping up with that, having investments that over a longer period can help keep up and grow beyond the inflation. So
Phil, we're at the S&P, we're down almost 15% for 22. So we're edging up to a bear. We're getting close to where we're going to see a bear market. And with all the volatility, with the craziness out of, Russia and some of the comments that are being made over the last couple of days at the time we're taping this, and just everything that's happening, I mean, I get wanting to feel like the world's getting too crazy. I just want to retreat. And it's really going to put a damper in. I mean, what happens if we go back down to 40 or 50% like 08, 09? Because we haven't seen that in a while.
We haven't. And unfortunately, I don't want to say we're due, but that's just what markets do, right? They move in these cycles.
Overdue.
And we've been well overdue for a correction, a substantial correction. I mean, we're, if markets are historically averaging 8%, I mean, just look at what it's done in the last 10 years. Anytime you earn on average more than that 8%, you're going to end up giving a lot of it back at some point to bring it back down to that average.
Right.
So,
no, there's definitely a lot of information. Again, this article, folks, if you'd like to check it out, we'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's a Yahoo financial article about retiring at 55. And there's some good information in here, but I think a lot of it comes down to really working with a professional and finding out, I mean, how even realistic is it? So like, for Chloe, she says she's 51, she may be working with somebody, we don't know, but it's like, are you going in? I mean, I'll be 51 this year. Am I going in to see somebody like Phil and saying, okay, here's what I got. How realistic is it, and what do we need to do to make it realistic?
Right. Yeah. And you don't just jump into it and think, I think I've got enough. Let's try it.
I think I got enough.
It's not something you want to try.
No,
run the math ahead of time, have a plan in place. Because one of the other pieces we didn't touch on yet is, even if, let's say Chloe, she's got this $1 million saved up, if it's all in an IRA, or, 401k even, have tax at least, at a minimum. If it's in an IRA, you have a penalty for the next 4.5 years if you retired at 55. Now there are some ways around that through setting up what they call a substantial equal distribution over, your lifetime to avoid it. Or if you had money in a 401k, then that age drops back to 55. So, I mean, there could be some possibilities there, but if not, if you haven't planned that in, now you have another 10% penalty, which is the tax at 15, 22% or 25% plus 10%, so if you're at 25% plus 10% penalty, it's 35% federal. We're in Michigan, and then add another 4.25 around it to call it 5, so now you're 40% in taxes. So
a little hefty.
So you've got to understand you have to understand how it works, right? Don't just jump in and say, well, but the general rules of thumb, I can do that.
Well, I want to do one
your
more
scenario.
Here. Yeah, I want to do one more, Phil, and then we'll wrap up so we don't get too long with this 55 conference, because we could actually turn this into 2 shows if we really wanted to. There's a lot of information.
A lot to cover.
Rick had sent something in a little while back, and I pulled this from another show to kind of add in here. And he was talking about the fact that he retired at 57 with 1.2 million.
Okay.
But he's single. Okay. So
Yep.
he says, which does make a difference in his retirement lifestyle. He's pretty frugal, but he does occasionally travel. He just looks for deals. So he fast forwarded to, he said, this is what happened when I retired at 57. I had the 1.2 million. Now he's 65 and his net worth is 1.6, so he says he's never regretted retiring early, but it helps to have the house paid off. We did not touch on that one, which is why I wanted to bring up Rick's question, Phil. So if you could get your house paid off by 55, does that make a difference in retiring early?
I mean, it could. It really comes down to what do you need that net monthly income, right? And that has to include, if you've got a house payment, the mortgage.
Okay.
So I mean, if you've eliminated that expense, well, now you don't need as much. So I mean, it could help. Not to say maybe it's the right decision,
right?
But it's just a part of the overall factor. It comes into what that net monthly need is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. People might look at Rick and say, well, look, he did it. I think I can do that. And his income, his assets actually grew. Yeah. Okay. Let's do a little math on that. If he's 65 today, he retired 8 years ago. What's the market done over the last 8 years?
Thank you, sir.
He's had a great market to retire in.
Triple. It's tripled, Phil.
Yeah. So where are you at today? We're kind of at this peak, right? Of this crazy bull run that we've been on for since 2009. Yeah. So 13 years almost.
Mm-hmm. And the last three
actually over. So and the last three have just gone ballistic since, going through the pandemic. So, I mean, they had wind in their sails, man. Yes. It was blowing hard,
Yes.
You're at the top and things are going to start potentially tipping, or even, I mean, they've already started, whether this continues, and it could, so timing is everything. He fortunately really had a great time.
No, for sure. And I think we did a good job of pulling 3 examples of the different kinds of ways to think about retiring early. Obviously, Penny had a lot going for her. Pensions make a big difference. Yeah. Spouse willing to work a few more years, and then also having a pension before activating Social Security. Chloe, having a good size of money, but being really cautious and saying, okay, maybe the strategy is not going to be effective because of inflation and because of stock market declines. And then you've got Rick saying, with the house, and he's made a little money over the last couple of years. But again, I think retiring early, Phil, comes down to almost like a perfect storm, right? Is it a perfect storm to the good or to the bad? If things happen the right way and they fall, you've got a plan. Clearly, you've got a plan, but you need a little luck. I feel anyway too.
Yeah, you do. I mean, the longer you're in retirement, the more risk there is. Mm-hmm. And not to say discourage people and say, oh, I'm going to just work till 70 now, forget it.
Right. Yeah.
No, don't do that. Just understand it's, the longer you're in retirement, pulling from your money, the more risk there is in that plan. And you just have to understand that risk, know how to position it, how to hedge against it, and be flexible.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you can't go in rigid and say, well, it's, I was expecting, I made $100,000 a year, so that's what I'm going to do. Well, okay, it could work, but the number you're going to need is a lot bigger.
Yeah.
So
if you're listening to the podcast or if you're watching the podcast and retirement early is on your mind, maybe it's not 55, maybe it's 57, maybe it's 59, maybe it's 59 and a half, right? So that you could actually access some of that stuff. We didn't even talk about that. Yep. We didn't even talk about the fact that you couldn't even access some of this money until you're 59 and a half.
Yep.
So, for 50 when you're retiring early. So either way, if you're thinking about retiring early, the best advice, and I think, Phil, you'll probably agree with me, not just because it's what you do, but I think the best advice would be A, get with an advisor, and B, get a strategy and a plan in place as soon as possible, because you got to have time to make this happen.
Yeah. I mean, retiring 55, 65, whatever the age is, it's the same process. You have to go through the same discussion and bullet points, but you just have longer to try to make sure that it works, and you've got more time that you're spending just from your money, which is going to put more risk and stress, so to speak, on those assets. So make sure you've run the math and understand how this works, and stress test it, run it code. I mean, if we have a good market, this is what it looks like. What if not? What's the strategy then? How does it work? Because you don't want to retire at 55 and we have a bad market. You didn't have a good plan, 10 years down the road. Now you don't have money, or you spent it down substantially. And now what are you going to do?
And you're going to work at 70.
Yeah, exactly. Now you're going to go back to work at that later age. I mean, is that really what you want to do? Just understand up front what it looks like. Maybe it's worth hanging in for a couple more years to make it work. But again, run the math up front. Yep. That's right.
I think she kind of realized, and it sounds as though she's going to probably hold off and go a little longer than her initial plan of 55. But we'll see. Chloe, if you're checking out this episode, reach back out to us. Let us know how it's going. So, Phil, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for tagging us. Again, if you want to check out the article, we'll put a link to it in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to us. Check us out. Follow us on whatever platforming app you like, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, all that stuff. We try to have a good conversation and share hopefully useful nuggets of information about retirement and the retirement journey. There's so many puzzle pieces, man. It just really depends on how it's going to work for your life and what's going on. You got to put those pieces together. You got to get with a professional to do so. It's been easy to DIY it, to Phil's point earlier, the last 13 years, especially the last 3, the market's made it fairly, we're all geniuses. It's in these times that it gets a little bit more nerve wracking. So reach out to Phil if you need some help. philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com. We'll see you next time right here on the podcast.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.